It's Mazzy, and this is time for the Acid Archives Diary. This is a very cool series of videos that I am contributing to based on this book. This is the second edition that came out in 2010. This is the first edition that I purchased. I did not get the first original 2006 version. I don't know if there is a subsequent version since, but this is a video on one album that is in this book. And this is a really cool ass concept. A series of videos originated by Dom, who has a channel called Seeking a Thread, a musician, a musicologist in essence, a lover of esoteric off-kilter music, as well as some of the traditional things too. So I know the cool kids like the things that are maybe not as commercial, but Dom has a wide knowledge and interest in music of all crossover genres. Definitely avant-garde, indie, psychedelic, folk, freak folk, primitive guitar, to name but a few. So there's a link below to Dom's channel and to specifically his first video on this. I don't know if he has a playlist yet. If you're watching Dom, which I assume you will, because you'll see the title here and I'll tell you to watch it, or I'll ask you to watch it, or request you to watch it. There should be a playlist. You should make a playlist because there are other contributors who make vinyl videos that have contributed to this. Some have done 2, 3, 4, 5 albums, but I'm going to go with the essence of what Dom is suggesting we do, is pick a record out of this book. Now, the book was originally concepted by Patrick Lundborg, a Swedish gentleman who started this in 2006, but he's brought in other contributors. So there's a number of contributors. And what I like about it in the back too, there is a special feature writers who have contributed here, various articles within this book, and also articles or little lists here where the writers will list maybe their 10 favorite records within this book and favorites not in the book. Now, I was going to do a second record today that it's not in the book, but maybe I'll save that for another time. But it seems to me I shouldn't do anything that's not in the book, although this contains a lot of great psychedelic, psychedelic folk music, indie music, a lot of private press, a lot of records, frankly, I have never heard of, and a lot of indie records. And there's a lot of fans of psychedelic music from the late 60s into the 1970s that will know about this. But frankly, even though I was around, this is my generation of shit, I don't know a lot of these records. I know those cool-ass covers that came along. What's great about this, it lists the record. There's an essay on every single record and the various releases on vinyl and compact disc. You can see here. Obviously, you see my sticky note here. The record I picked, I got to be true to my San Francisco roots. And this is an album I bought, but I don't have the original anymore. And I bought it when it came out, and it was one of those what the fuck moments when I bought this record. And there's records that just seem so out of it at the time that don't seem to fit at the time of the release. And this is a record from 1969, and the record is called Ore by Skip Spence. Now, this is the expanded version. That was a expanded CD. Some say this is an undiscovered masterpiece, if you will. It's interesting how certain records, just people literally can't stand them when they come out, and all of a sudden they become masterpieces, and artists and writers, fans of music discover them decades and half a century later, or at least decades later in this case. Now, I want to talk about this record. This is, again, the expanded Sundays, which actually Modern Harmonic, which is a sort of the edgier electronic, experimental, off-kilter division of Sundays. Modern Harmonic is a lot of releases of electronic music, of things like Sun Ra, things like that. So Skip Spence, Alexander Skip Spence, was born in Canada and he died in Santa Cruz, California. But he's an integral part of the San Francisco scene. And that's, of course, where I got into him and how I got into him. So he is on this book. So if you have this book, the second edition, page 307, and maybe after I kind of do my take on it, I'll read a little bit about this, what the essay was. But let me give you a little background on Skip Spence. Skip Spence was the original drummer for the Jefferson Airplane. He plays drums on only this record, and then he's out of there, and they got the better drummer, which really worked for them, in Spencer Dryden, starting in Surrealistic Pillow. And this is, of course, when Sidney Anderson was the singer of Jefferson Airplane. And after this, she left to have her child move north out of San Francisco. And of course, Grace Slick would join the band and bring those two great songs that catapulted them as the first San Francisco band to jump on the national stage and created that whole Summer of Love press thing that was happening in the Haight-Ashbury, San Francisco. Then, of course, he's one of the founding members, switching to guitar on Moby Grape. This is their debut album. Gets signed to Columbia. All the labels started coming to San Francisco to sign any band possible. Of course, RCA, to their credit, signed the Jefferson Airplane, and their second album really took off in '67. But Columbia came. Columbia signs Moby Grape. Columbia eventually, a year later, signed Santana. We had Capitol Records signing the Quicksilver Messenger Service. Capitol signs Steve Miller Band. And you can even get the smaller labels signing all these bands. Vanguard signs Country Joe and the Fish, and so on and so forth. Fantasy eventually in '68 signs Creedence Clearwater Revival from the East Bay. And you could go on, and I have gone on in videos on mine. But this is probably one of the most powerful of those albums out of the San Francisco bands. 3 guitar players plus a bass player on this. This is a powerhouse album. The song Omaha just explodes, especially on 45, especially in mono, but even stereo here. This great cover shot by Jim Marshall with the famous Flipping the Bird, which they eventually would retouch out. It comes with the large full poster of that Jim Marshall picture there, produced by David Rubinson, who at the time was, I believe, a staff A&R and producer at Columbia, based in San Francisco. Columbia did have a studio in San Francisco at the time on Folsom Street. David Rubinson would later purchase that studio and change it to and call it the Automat. Columbia really screwed these guys because they had a party in San Francisco, and as a big promotion, they released 5 singles at once. And especially in those days, if you know radio, you push to the program director, to the music director, 1 record, to the DJs, 1 record. And when radio stations have 5 singles to choose from, nothing's going to be played. So this wasn't the hit it should have been, but it's such an influential record. It's such a wonderful record. The other problem is a guy who just passed away. Good riddance to Matthew Katz. He would say Matthew Cates, but it's whatever you want to call it. He has his name there, Matthew Cates Production. He also managed several groups. He managed Jefferson Airplane, but they luckily pulled away from Matthew Cates, Matthew Katz, early on. Smart them. And he managed also It's a Beautiful Day. For whatever reason, he ended up owning the name Moby Grape, It's a Beautiful Day. So they could not pull and put records out years later under his name. He had the pulse on it. So good fucking riddance to Matthew Katz. I know I digress, but I think this is part of the story of this whole thing. What was it, 15, 20 years ago, Sundays started releasing these Moby Grape records and did a beautiful job with this record, with Wow. The first, was it 3 or 4 records with Grape Jam on Wow. And they had to pull those records right away because Matthew Katz threatened to sue for putting that out because he owned it. So he didn't do anything good for the label to get the records out there. So they had to pull those CDs and vinyl records at the time. I do have sets of those as well. So boo hoo hoo, good riddance, Matthew. Cats. The reason I'm here is to talk about or. This again is and or again the expanded one. This was in 1969. There was a time, a tempestuous time. He leaves the band. He's out of the band, tossed out of the band. I think of Moby Grape. He had drug issues. He had mental health issues. He gets checked into Bellevue Mental Hospital for I think 6 months or so, and he comes out, and he wants to do music. And David Rubinson, the producer, suggests he go to Nashville, the Columbia studio in Nashville, and work there. And he worked there on these songs, thinking they were demos. They roll the tape tape goes and just plays everything. They edit together and they put out Or. He thought this was going to be something he could bring back to David Rubinson and do a full band record. And it was the worst selling record Columbia Records had ever put out up to that point, and I believe within a year it was discontinued out of print. So the original is very rare now; it goes for a lot of money. This has become this cult classic. It's indie, almost psychedelic folk, what we call now freak folk. It influenced so many artists. Think Daniel Johnson. I don't even know if he heard this record, but this kind of mix of etherealness, of lo-fi. This also has a little bit of the feel, I would say, of the solo years of Syd Barrett. It's not as produced, not as accessible, but it's a haunting record. Here is the Sundays reissue CD that came out, I think, in 1999 there. One of my favorite songs in here is Lawrence of Euphoria. But again, it is a wonderful record that has become very influential, especially probably during the 90s indie band scenes and the crossover of a little bit of a folk country feel to it. But it's anything but commercial, but is a magnificent artifact, but very listenable, I think, especially on modern ears now, artists who are in indie, lo-fi, that sound. So influential that some years ago this came out. Now, what's interesting about this, again, this is Columbia Records. Columbia Records at the requested David Rubinson signs him solo, and he puts this out, and who would put those Moby Grape records out, and of course the sales on those went down and down and down. But so influential that some years later, in the last 15, 20 years, this came out. More Or, a tribute to Skip Spence. Came out originally on CD. I believe this is a Record Store Day later issue. It's a double album. Robert Plant, Mark Lanigan, Alejandro Escovedo, the Doo-Rocks, Jay Ferrer, the Ophelias, Flying Saucer Attack, Mudhoney, Robin Hitchcock, Tom Waits, Beck, the -5. There is a Skip Spence version on here of Land of the Sun, and it ends up with Little Hands by the Flaming Lips. So these bands that do esoteric work, that do a combination of folk and country and neo-psychedelic and avant-garde, especially someone like Tom Waits, gets what this is about. Flawed as it is, this record Or. This record is really a cool supplement, and I think these go hand in hand because you get a little more of a produced version in some cases over the original versions by Skip Spence, and you get more outtakes and demos and alternate versions. Remember, this is one of those situations where he's in Nashville and the producer, quote, engineer, didn't have an official producer, but engineer turns on the tapes and just lets him play, and they hobble together an album. Let's see what now, the whole crux to this and this presentation, this series, is the Acid Archives. Again, not everything is straight psychedelia, but it is off-kilter, a lot of independent, a lot of experimental in the psychedelic genres, but just a great thing. Now, there are a lot of records that I have that are probably more from major labels or sub-major labels that I have that aren't even in here. And I'm surprised at some of the labels, maybe some of the records that are not in this book. And obviously that's because they're maybe known by more. And in fact, when, as I said earlier, when you read the back and it says, each reviewer says favorites not in the box. They tend to be, a lot of these favorites are more of major label artists. Everything from Led Zeppelin to Nick Drake to Donovan, to the Beatles and television. Not everything psychedelic is from that period. Although I think the most of these, of the Acid Archives, it says a guide to underground sounds 1965 to 1982. So it's a vastness. I suppose they could expand it even into the 90s and beyond, because there's so many psychedelic and post-psychedelic bands that were influenced by these bands, but that would be such a massive volume. Highly recommend you get this book. It is still in print, still available. But let's see what they say about Ore in this book. Retired Acid Archives panelist Mans Manson pays tribute to Skip. As you probably know, this is the solo album Alexander Skip Spence recorded after getting sacked from Moby Grape and spending 6 months in Bellevue Hospital. The songs were written while he was committed, and it kind of shows. It's a fragmented and demo-like, but at the same time filled with emotion and raw beauty. It's often described as a downer and depressive, which I think is extremely unjust. I agree with that, because I'm a fan of really dark music. I mean, whenever I talk about certain Nick Cave records, he's got a darkness and what I love about the spirituality, the sexualness of his records, and about death and angels and devils and demons and things. But there's something that to me is very uplifting, because he's writing from the heart. I don't know if Skip Spencer was writing from the heart more than writing from the shit going in and out of his brain at the time. The spectrum is much wider. There's a country-ish broken down, a tale of revenge, cheating, and death, which predates Johnny Cash's raw acoustic recording by 3 decades. The influence of American folk music, or cosmic Americana, runs throughout the whole album and keeps it together. That's the thing. This is a cosmic album. Or is psychedelic not in the fuzzy scene? I think a lot of people of my generation see all psychedelia as wah-wah pedals and, phasing going in and out of their ears. And this is not that. This is an intimate record, and it is a broken singer's performance. But I'm going to just end it right there and say I highly recommend you find a copy. If you see an original of this, it's going for some money. I need to get original again. Don't know. I guess in 95, when my third of my collection purge happened, is when I got rid of this. Not sure why I did, but I did. On Columbia Records, a major label artist who put out something that has no connection to major label artwork, especially from 1969, even when the labels were experimenting, and Columbia tended to be in the more conservative New York label of all of them. Didn't take as many chances as some of the other labels. So anyway, Dom, thanks for starting this. Thanks for suggesting this. The Acid Archives, this is a cool concept for a series of video. The Ultimate Guide to Underground Sounds, expanded and revised, 2nd edition. Mazzy loves you.